Hello. Today our book is Favor Johnson. It was written by Willem Lang, one of our good friends, and illustrated by his friend Bert Dodson. Snow was falling in the village at Christmas Eve. The brook rattled down behind the post office. People had finished supper. Christmas tree lights shone through their windows. The village seemed to be waiting for something. About 7 in the evening, an old blue pickup with shaky headlights drove slowly into the village and stopped at the first house. A man in overalls and an old red and black check jacket got out and trudged up to the kitchen door of the house with a small package wrapped in aluminum foil. He knocked on the door. When a woman opened it, the man in overalls handed her the shiny package. Then everyone else in the house came to the door to say hello. As he walked back to his truck, they all called after him, "Merry Christmas," and he waved. He drove to the next house and did the same thing, and then on to the next, and all the way down through the village. After the last house, he turned his truck around, drove back through the village, and disappeared into the night. Favor Johnson had delivered his Christmas presents again. They were fruit cakes baked in tin cans. For 2 people, it was a soup can. For small families, a vegetable can. And for larger families, a tomato can, mixed with butter and filled with hickory nuts, cherries, pineapple, citron, and raisins. The fruitcakes were flavored with hard cider. Favor lived on a broken-down old hill farm about 2 miles above the village. He was poor and lived there alone. Well, not quite alone. He had an old horse, a few cows, a coop full of chickens, 6 geese, and about 40 cats, and his constant companion, a spotted hound named Hercules. Oh. Then one year, Favor's property taxes went up, and he couldn't pay them anymore, so he decided to sell his hilltop, which had a view to the west all the way to the Green Mountains. The hilltop was bought by Dr. Jennings, a surgeon from Massachusetts. Dr. Jennings and his wife had a big stone and glass house built where they hoped to retire someday. They came every Friday night and went back home again Sunday evening. Favor liked the Jennings. They usually came down to his house Saturday mornings to talk or buy a few eggs or maple syrup. Sometimes they invited him to dinner. Favor was always polite, but he never went. Then, one Christmas Eve, Hercules, for the first time in his life, didn't show up at the barn for the evening milking. Favor whistled and called, but there was no answer. Then Favor remembered he'd heard about the hunters down in his swamp that afternoon. So after milking, he got his flashlight and headed down the hill. It was dark and beginning to snow. He wandered for hours through the swamp, calling and whistling. Finally, he heard a whine and found Hercules. He had been shot. His head and shoulder were bleeding into the snow. Favor scooped him up and headed toward the house. His flashlight faded and died. Just as Favor reached the road with Hercules in his arms, the headlights of a car swept across him. It was Doc and his wife headed for the Christmas Eve church service. The big car decided to stop, and Doc jumped out. "What's happened?" he cried. Favor told him. "Well, come on," said Doc. "Let's get him to the vet." "Nope," said Favor. "I don't want to do that. This is the only home he's ever known. If he's going to die, it ought to be right here." Tears and sweat ran together down his face. "Okay," said Doc. "Honey, will you run up the hill and get the first aid kit in the kitchen, please?" "Come on, Favor, let's get that dog in the house." They hurried Hercules into Favor's kitchen. Doc told Favor to boil some water. Doc took off his coat and examined Hercules. His jaw was broken. Some teeth were missing. His shoulder had been torn open. He was moaning and panting. "I don't know if it's proper to pray for a dog, Favor," said Doc, "but it can't hurt. This old guy is not in very good shape." Mrs. Jennings brought the first aid kit and some sweet rolls. She brewed coffee while Doc worked, and Favor watched. After 3 in the morning, Doc took his last stitch, swabbed the wounds with antiseptic, and gave the exhausted dog a shot for the pain. They lifted Hercules and laid him very gently on his mat beside the stove. "Thanks, Doc," said Favor. "He looks a lot better than he did. What do I owe you?" "Owe me," said Doc. "Why, nothing. I know you'd do whatever you could for me if I needed it, and this was just something I could do for you. You better get some sleep." When Doc came down to check on Hercules and Favor later on Christmas morning, Hercules was too weak to raise his head, but his long tail thumped on the mat. "I think he's going to be all right," said Doc. "Merry Christmas." He handed Favor a fancy boxed fruitcake. Favor thanked him again for saving Hercules and for the fruitcake, but later, tasting it, he gagged. "Ha!" he exclaimed. "I can do better than that." And that's how it started. He made just one that first year for Doc and Mrs. Jennings. They liked it so much that the next year he made a few more for some of his friends. Then the response was tremendous, and within a few years he was making them for everybody in the village, and the village responded. Now, all through the Christmas season, there are cars in his dooryard, and his kitchen is piled high with gifts that he enjoys all through the long winter. And Hercules is all better. Some of the village kids even think that he's Santa Claus in disguise. That seems to give him the greatest pleasure of all. We need to thank Bunker Hill Publishing for making this book possible for us to read today.